My name is Kelsey Long. I am an art history major here at BYU, and I am talking about Soren Kierkegaard and his views on individualism. Unlike his predecessors, Soren Kierkegaard took a different approach to his philosophical studies by choosing to look at the world through a more artistic lens, and thereby moving away from the more regimented systems of philosophers such as Hegel and Aristotle. Though Kierkegaard was a follower of Hegel, he was vastly opposed to Hegel's abstract method of problem-solving. He was uninterested in looking at things systematically, and instead chose to see the world through the view of individualism and subjectivity. Kierkegaard believed that all philosophical systems rely on the inherent prejudices of the creator or thinker behind them, and that this inherent prejudice leads to the subjectivity in their philosophical viewpoints. As such, Kierkegaard chose not to follow a systematic approach to his philosophical thought. For Kierkegaard, objectivity was nearly impossible in the philosophical realm. He believed that truth is found through subjectivity, through our individual unique apprehension of things. Through this subjectivity, Kierkegaard came to believe that existing, in contrast to simply being, involves having a relationship with one's true self. The European Graduate School Library contains a further discussion on the concept of subjectivity and truth. You can find the link below this video. Kierkegaard presents three possibilities that an individual might pass through throughout their life in order to become a true self: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. He describes the possibilities thusly: the aesthetic, there are no serious choices, as it is more important to live life with as much enjoyment as possible. The ethicist believes that life is what you make and do with it. It is a series of serious choices that determines the continuing self. The Christian believes that we cannot discover self without faith in God, a forgiveness through Christ. When we accept that view, we are free to be our true selves. Looking at the possibilities Kierkegaard presents, it would be easy to see them through a Hegelian point of view, as earlier stages being reworked and remedied by later stages. However, this is a false view. Kierkegaard, with his focus on the individual, rejects Hegel's idea that it is natural and necessary for the evolution of the consciousness to ever higher levels. Hegel believes that the consciousness evolves from savage or barbaric forms based on sensory experience to perceptual consciousness that is determined by experience. In other words, we move from beings that focus on what our five senses tell us to beings that are perceptive based on the experiences we gain in life. The last level, understanding consciousness, transcends perceptual by the use of increased sciences such as mathematics or physics. To read more on Hegel's evolution of the consciousness, click on the link below the video. Instead of this Hegelian view of consciousness, Kierkegaard believes that there are several possibilities for the self throughout life, and that all the possibilities are on the same level. One does not necessarily have to move from one level to another based on experience or scientific endeavors. The possibilities that Kierkegaard presents are the choices that each individual must make. It is not that one moves through one to another, but that one must make a choice as to where one will best fit. However, Kierkegaard believes that one cannot look outside all the points and see things objectively, unlike Hegel, who believes that there is such a vantage point, and that such vantage point offers absolute knowledge. Unlike many of his predecessors, Kierkegaard wrote under various pseudonyms. This was done in order to present multiple viewpoints on one very important idea: existence as a human being. Kierkegaard chose this method of writing because of the idea of self-deception. He believed that we all live in various degrees or forms of self-deception, and therefore it was necessary to provide insight into the problem through multiple views or pseudonyms. It was a way of connecting to his audience by coming down to their individual level of self-deception or understanding. John Lippitt, a philosophical scholar, wrote an interesting article based on a psychoanalytical response to Kierkegaard's use of pseudonyms as a form of therapy for his readers. The link to his article can be found below this video. One key concept that Kierkegaard focuses on within his scope of individualism is the idea of sin, or how we sin in this life. Christianity, in Kierkegaard's book Either Or, tells us that we are sinners and that sin is despair. For a complete introduction to Kierkegaard's book Either Or, see the video link in the links below. Kierkegaard's definition of despair is an individual's unwillingness to be their true self. While despair represents the desire to be something or someone else, it also represents our potential ability to grow. Following this argument, Kierkegaard determines that sin is more than just despair, it is self-deception. Unlike Spinoza, who discussed bad emotions, and Hegel, who discusses sin as being not free, Kierkegaard believes that sin is when we know or are aware of the choices before us and make the choices anyway. It is through despair and pessimism that we are led to self-deception and sin. To read more about the morality of self-deception, click on the link below this video for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry under Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard's view is very different from philosophers of the past such as Socrates, who believed that sin was rooted in ignorance. Socrates believed that sin was something that could happen to everyone, and that people could all sin in the same way. Kierkegaard, on the other hand, believed that sin was individualized. He explains that when we look to the past and think about whether or not we know something, we make a choice. If we knew something and yet still made a poor choice, then it would be considered a sin. However, Kierkegaard says that we cannot truly know things, as we cannot look at all things objectively as an existing human being. Unlike Hegel, who believes there is an absolute knowledge as a vantage point, Kierkegaard believes there is no knowledge here at all. We are free to choose between possibilities, but are not free to choose for good reasons, in other words, from an objective point of view. Many philosophers, from Plato to Descartes to Hume, have discussed the concept of ideas, which are typically abstract concepts that describe the objects we encounter in reality. These abstract concepts represent true knowledge beyond what our flawed perceptions can determine. Kierkegaard believes that a submission to the will of the idea is a denial of true selfhood or individualism. Jack Marsh, in his article Hegel, Kierkegaard, and the Structure of a Spiritful Self, discusses the problem Kierkegaard saw within society of peoples allowing themselves to be determined by their context. See the link below to read the full article. Kierkegaard, believing that this life is made up of choices, is a strong advocate for the importance of personal responsibility and choice-making. The choices one makes defines and creates the self that one becomes. Going back to the various pseudonyms that Kierkegaard employs, we can understand that his authors represent themselves in such a way as to be seen in the process of self-creation. They represent the possibilities the readers can actualize in their own lives. They elicit self-examination and awareness. Kierkegaard calls this technique indirect communication and believes that it is self-deception that keeps us from discovering this self-examination on our own. In this sense, true individuality can be understood as selfhood. Becoming aware of our true self is our true task and endeavor in life. It is an ethical imperative as well as preparatory to a true religious understanding. Hegel presents a worldview of passivity, a world where we exist and are pulled along to some rational end, but there is nothing that we can really do about it. We are being constantly pulled forward, and what will be, will be. Hegel believes that we need to accept that position and move on. However, Kierkegaard rejects this idea, as he believes that existence does not simply consist of being pulled along to the peak of civilization and ideas. There are things such as suffering, self-deception, and pessimism in each individual life that Hegel's beliefs cannot explain. Instead of passivity, Kierkegaard advocates individualism and choice. We are not pulled through life towards some predetermined end, but rather travel through life as individuals, making individual choices that determine where we end up. We live in order to discover our true self. Kierkegaard believes that being a self is a balance between what we immediately factually are and the possibility of reflecting on that and doing something about it. It is a task and one that every person must live through simply by being alive. Kierkegaard's thoughts on the actualization of selfhood, or true individuality, influenced many 20th century philosophers such as Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. His views on individualism, or becoming aware of our true self by looking at truth through a subjective point of view, became a large part of the existential movement, and many pointed to him as a precursor for the movement itself. To read more about how Kierkegaard's thoughts on freedom and angst influenced the existential movement, see the link below this video. Kierkegaard questioned life and the way we live through a Christian point of view, trying to discover how we might be able to best live life in a meaningful and thought-provoking way. Today, his advocacy for individualism stands as an example for how one should strive to find their true self in a world of ideas.